Hello, everybody, and welcome to Star Trek New Worlds. My name is Tony. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us live, then thanks for the time. And if you're catching us on the replay, thanks for taking the time to invest in this fun-filled game that we call Star Trek New Worlds. If you're brand new, you're probably wondering, what is Star Trek New Worlds? Star Trek New Worlds is a 4X turn-based strategy game that we play online with you, using the Federation and Empire rule set as published by the Amarillo Design Bureau. And we use the platform Vassal to be able to show that to you, which you'll see in here in a second. And like I said, we play this, streaming it online with you on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. Although, unfortunately, today, Facebook isn't playing nice, so no live stream on Facebook today, just Twitch and YouTube. So, yeah, what are we going to talk about today? Today is going to be a very interesting episode. There's so much interesting stuff happening on the map. So, first of all, as you could tell by the thumbnail, who did we find? I think you can probably tell by the kitty cats, the Lyrans. And we're going to take a look at the Lyrans, see how big they are. There have been sort of chatter, rumor about this massive fleet, and whoever their neighbor is, watch out. We're going to see that in a second. We're also going to see that somebody has already found the Lyrans. Who is that? What's going on? We'll see that in a moment. We're also going to take a look at the Romulans, which is going to be interesting. They've also found somebody. Somebody's found them. We'll get to see that in a moment as well. The Klingons did what? Something has happened on the Klingon side, and the Klingons have done something, or about to do something, and we'll talk about that. And other than that, it's just an all-around reveal for turn 38. We'll be talking about the Fearsome Four, which is now everybody on the east side of the map, including the Remans, the ISC, the Hydrons, and the Carnavans. So the Fearsome Four, I'm calling them for now. We're going to be covering their map as well. And just a whole bunch of checking in with everybody. There's one faction that that's out there. We're also going to check in on the Federation, but the faction that we can't see necessarily is the Tholians. You'll see that when we cover the Federation map. Yeah, so just a couple little things, housekeeping before we get rolling into the turns. One, I got a couple of different things I'm trying in today's live stream. You'll see that in a moment. And I would love to hear your comments in the chat, and which you'll see that will be kind of funny. So not only in the chat, but also if you're watching on the replay, in the comments below. Tell me what you think about this little introduction, and we'll see how that goes. And we shall go from there. Let me, without further ado, kind of tease you what's going on in that regard. I'll show you that now. So here we can see there is a slight, and the text is too small in that text box. Oh my goodness. So at different points in the live stream, I'll kick to the chat, and you'll see here that I've got the chat displayed on the screen. However, it's far too small, and I'm going to have to fix that. I don't know that I can do that in real time while hosting the show, but I'll look to fix that in future episodes. But what do you think of this layout? Me talking, text on the side, or text on the side that way, and some notifications on the bottom. Right now, we've got the latest subscriber. There's also a subscriber alert, so if you were to subscribe right now during this live stream, you would see an alert pop up. Waiting for it, and we'll see how that works. It'll be interesting to see how those alerts work well during the course of a live stream, and of course the interaction with the chat. I have to change the size of that chat. Okay, let's get out of this and move into the stuff that you're here to see. Let's talk about the Lyrans. Ba-ba-boom. So again, this is this map is not displaced. A lot of the maps you're going to see today are displaced, in the sense that that's not the true location of where they are. This is. So this is the real deal Holyfield location for where the Hydrons are, or sorry, the Lyrans are on the map. Well, you can see they are a very, just by looking at sort of like ship counters and stuff, you can see that there's quite a collection here on the map. Let's just take the ships away for a sec, and we can see their sort of resources and base distribution. We'll cover EP and fleet cap in a moment. But let's just take a quick look here. So you can see they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bases in a very interesting pattern. The star represents their capital system, so their home system. And you can see that the exploration that they've focused on has really been away from the center and more towards the back end, the backyard, as we sometimes refer to it. Very interesting to see, because, of course, they've explored along the edge of the galaxy, so to speak, and have found a bunch of resources in their backyard. The base infrastructure that they've built is specifically designed to facilitate that, and not really focusing around sort of protecting their homeworld. You can see they are sticking to a sort of a 2-hex distribution in this straight line, in this northwest straight line to the edge of the galaxy, 1, 2, 3. But beyond that, in the northwest, they've got another base here, but then they're going to 3. So I wonder if that's just based on necessity when these bases were built in accordance with their supply. So you start off with supply 2, you get to 3, and eventually 4 and 5 and 6. But it seems here that the base building may have been when they got certain levels of supply tech. Very interesting to see. Let's bring the ships back, and we can see there's quite a bit there. Let's take a quick look at EP and fleet cap before we dive into who's who in the zoo, where those ships actually are. So starting off, we can see the Lyrans have a 27.5 economy. Very interesting. So let's take a quick look here in their capital system, and we can see that all of their home system planets are happy. So they're getting the perk and the bump from that. Also interesting to note the amount of planetary bases, ground bases that they've built, more than the average. And so they've got 27.5 EP. That is on the, if we include everybody, that's pushing the average to the top end versus what we've seen in previous turns, the 22, the 23 kind of ballpark. We know that the Remans in the last live stream were floating around 25, and this is 27.5. This is much more in line with where the Hydrans were maybe a turn or two ago. So very interesting to see that from the size perspective, they're relatively small when compared to, let's say, the Hydrans. The Hydrans are right now the biggest from a footprint perspective. They've got the most reach and explored the most territory. But for the amount of space that they have, very compact, 27.5 EP. So pretty good. Let's take a quick look at fleet cap, and this is where I think things are going to get fun. Yeah. Okay, so the Lyrans have a 120 fleet cap. They have a 54 attack, 120 defense, but they have 27 ship equivalents. Now, to put that into context, the kinds of things we've seen from other players have been in the teens, basically. The spread has been just starting 10 to kind of the top end near 20, and there's been the odd person with a little over 20. For example, the Federation. Well, the Lyrans are at 27. That is the largest fleet cap that we have seen to date. The largest fleet cap number, and the largest ship equivalents. So let's take maybe a quick look at their ships just to kind of like dissect how good these bad boys are. Apex Fleet. Let's see. Where am I going to find Apex Fleet in here? There's Apex Fleet. Okay. So let's take a quick look at Apex Fleet. Here's a good example. It's not too far from their homeworld, and it's right now sitting on top of a colony, looking to try and make that colony friendly. So you can see that they have Y-Tech very clearly. They have a YCA. Their YCA is a 3-6. This is much more in line with what we see with the Hydrans in the sense of lower attack, significant defense, and their destroyers are 2-4s. So 2-4s and 3-6s. That's kind of the split that we've got on their ships. That ties in beautifully with what we see on the Lyran fleet cap, which is basically a 50-50 split between the attack and the defense factor. So that speaks volumes as to sort of what they've got. We can also take a look at Farstar's fleet. Let's see here. Farstar's fleet. Boom. So here we've got a W-era fleet. So same idea, but we've got a 3-5 for their CA as opposed to the 3-6. A WDD with a 1.5-3 versus the 2-4. and a W-era frigate, which is a 1-2. But again, 4 ships in that fleet. So really interesting to see the sort of the composition and where those fleets are sitting overall. We can tell, I can't really tell the type of ships based on that fleet cap, but we can see that the majority of the ships that I'm looking at here, it looks like there is a reasonable split, 50-50-ish, between Y and W ships, which is interesting. I don't see a lot of fleet. There's nothing in patrol. So let me see. We've got the YSR, so that's their survey cruiser, near the edge of their space. And you can see that it's at 3 hexes away from their nearest supply point, so supply 3. You've got these cruisers, which are fitted with prime teams. So interesting that he's got 2 of them together here. And what else we got? We got a couple of small exploration ships, total of 3 of them, 1, 2, 3, and a large exploration freighter over here. And then we have a WSR. Interesting to note that the WSR is labeled WSR2, but there's a WSR, YSR, and a YFEL, meaning that suggests to me that at some point the first WSR got smoked or destroyed in some way, shape, or form. So interesting to see that. Yeah, so really interesting to look at. Okay, so the Lyrans fundamentally, biggest, baddest fleet that we've seen so far, even comparable to the Carnavans, which have more ship numbers. Well, actually, no, not even more ship numbers. From a fleet cap ship equivalent perspective, the Lyrans are the king of the hill, the rooster of the roost in this respect. And you can see the majority of their ships are sort of pushing on the edge of their exploration. The biggest sort of constraint here that I see is just that infrastructure of base building. The base building is the fundamental thing that's restricting their ability to build more or expand further out. Just to put a sort of a point on that, let's take away the ships for a sec, and we can see they're really going to push based on this base distribution. They're pushing to the northeast and the southwest along the edge of the galaxy here. Very interesting to see kind of how that's working. We bring the ships back, and I don't necessarily see, for example, a tug, or I don't think the Lyrans, it would seem that the Lyrans don't have a tug at this point, and I don't see any convoys building bases other than the 2 convoys we can see facilitating this base that just got built in X-Ray 5, and then a convoy near this warp signature in this wormhole over in Oscar 8. So very, very, very interesting. But let's take a second and talk about that little guy, that little guy up there. Don't worry about that guy up there. That little guy up there. A warp signature, size class 4, so probably something like a destroyer or frigate. I know exactly who that is, and we'll get to that in a second. But very interesting to see that the Lyrans are this hot little pocket in the top left-hand side of the map, and somebody has just found them. We'll talk about who that is in a moment. But without further ado, let's talk about the Romulans. Now, I want to talk about the Romulans right back to back with the Lyrans, because as we look at this map, this is a displaced map, so we're not looking at where they are in real time, but we can see that they also have a little visitor, a warp size class 4 visitor. So we'll see who that is in a moment, but I want to do these guys back to back before we go to the Fearsome 4, where we'll see all that. So this is the Romulan fleet, very homogeneous in its sort of blob exploration pattern. In this case, let's start with EP, because it's going to tell an interesting story. So we'll put it over here. So 27.5 EP for the Romulans. Exactly the same as it was for the Lyrans. Very interesting. Let's take a look at their fleet cap. I think their fleet cap says it all. So the Lyrans had 27 ship equivalents. 27 ship equivalents? Let's just go back there and take a quick look. Was it 27 ship equivalents? It was 27. So they have 27 ship equivalents. The Romulans have 26. Notice the split, too. They had a 53 to 120 attack to defense factor. The Romulans have a 37 to 96. Quite a disparity there. But very similar ship count. So we'll dig around and figure out why that is in a second here. But again, from a size perspective, doing pretty well. The Romulans look like they're doing pretty well here. They've got, like if we count the distance to the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to this warp signature. That's to the northwest. 1, 2, 3, 4 to the south. And you can see that there is this large distribution of fleets around the homeworld. So let's take a quick look at the Romulan fleets. Well, actually, let's get rid of all the fleets for a second. We can see their bases and resources. So we can see that the Romulan homeworld, stationed right here, essentially center of the map, and something akin to a 2-base distribution, but sort of like an interesting pattern. So north, straight north, we've got a base there, and we can see that there's sort of this blocky, sort of ISC-like base building pattern that they've sort of begun, which is, 2 to the left, 2 straight up, 2 to the right. So very sort of not fitting the hexagonal pattern, but very blocky. In the same way, you can look straight to the east. You can see that same block pattern forming. But when we go to the south, it changes, which is interesting because the where the block pattern has been consistent, everything north of the, we'll call it the Romulan equator here. In the south, their pattern is adopting that more diagonal off-axis line. You can see here between Echo 28 and Foxtrot 29, it's not riding the normal up, down, left, right, or even the normal hexagonal pattern. It's riding the narrow line between these two hexes, still 2 hexes apart, and still mutually supporting the other bases, but just a different pattern, which leads me to think that Delta 29 here is going to get a base and build it out that way. But it's interesting to see that there's a different strategy north and a different strategy south for the base building. I'll be interested to see how that evolves going forward. If we bring back the ships, we can see, like, again, quite a distribution. And let's take a quick look at some of these fleets. So Romulan, let's see here. Who's who in the zoo? Fleet Rolandus, which is this one here in the sort of top right corner. Let's put this over my head. So we can see here that it's a WPB. So a W era, I want to call it a patrol bird, but it's a survey ship. You can see that based on the white diamond that's in the that's on the counter. So for this particular unit, the white diamond indicates the survey as opposed to a scout, which we'll talk about in the combat module, which would have a black diamond. A black diamond like you see on the bases here, on the base counters, they have a black diamond. So the white diamond is just a survey vessel, and then it has an SSN. An S here is the era before W. Now, I know in everything else that we've talked about the sort of the 4 time frames of this game: W, Y, M, and GW. WY being the early era, M being middle, and then the GW is the General War, which is sort of the setting of the normal tabletop game. The S, is the pre-W time frame. And from a chronological perspective, purely from a chronological perspective, the Romulans were slower to develop than some of the other factions in the chronology of the Starfleet universe, meaning that they had sort of warp-capable but very poorly armed ships in what they call the S era, which is just before W. And they're just a little bit behind everybody else in sort of the normal time frame of the Starfleet universe when it comes to progressing their tech. That changes later on in the sense of some of the ships they get are amazing. But as far as year to year, when things are introduced, they're a little bit behind some of the other factions. And so in that context, we have S ships for the Romulans, which represent that earlier time frame before W, and that's what we're seeing here. So what does that mean? They're just weaker ships. They're weaker ships. They move 2 hexes at a time, and that's pretty much it. No other constraint when it comes to combat or any other aspect in the game. The only limitation is just that they move 2 and they're just weaker. That's pretty much it. So you can see here the SSN. The SN, by the way, is the snipe or the frigate for the Romulans. Just like, for example, we have the E1, E2, E3, those ships for the Klingons. The snipes or the SNs here are that same thing for the Romulans. So we've got a couple other things here. Let's take a look. Romulan patrol. We've got so many different fleets. Let's go to East Fleet. I can find that easily here. So you can see here, and this is a good contrast. So we have a WWB, which is not the survey version of the Warbird. So W-era Warbird, which has a 2-4 attack and defense, and then it has a WSN. So this is the next level from S to W to Y. So the WSN, so W-era snipe. And you can see it's just a little bit better. It has a 1.5 attack, same defense. So basically it's the same hull, but they just fitted it with better weapons. And that's pretty much it. And so that's the East Fleet. That's in the bottom right corner. Rolandus Fleet is the one on the top right. And let's take another look. Let's take a look at, wow, what is the name of that? Tyrcellus. Fleet of Tyrcellus. So Fleet of Tyrcellus, we can see here it's got a YFEL and an SSN. So a S-era frigate, a large exploration cruiser, or sorry, freighter, and that's saying hi to this little warp signature up in the top corner. Let's look at Joint Task Force Delta. No, that's Omega. Hold on, where are you? Boop. There's Delta. There's Epsilon. Nothing in Epsilon. What we got? So we've got a WWB, a WSN, and there we go. Colossus Fleet. So why am I going through all these different fleets like this? Just to illustrate what is in, what's making up the Romulan fleet. Now, what we can see is there's a lot of W-era ships. I don't see, as of yet, any Y-era ships. But if we're going to find them, we're probably going to find them in the home fleet. So let's look at their home fleet. And there we go. So we can see in their home fleet, we've got quite a collection of ships here. We've got a YKB, which is a Y-era cruiser. It's a Kingbird, which is like a sort of like a command cruiser. So that's a 4.6 for them. A WWB, again, this is a W-era cruiser. That's a 2.4. A YSN, which is a Y-era frigate, at a 2.3, and that's like par for the course for all Y-era frigates. A WSN, again, 1.5, 2, and a WCB. The CB is a commando bird, and in this case, the G is a different sort of. It basically means they have Marines on board that they can use to conduct a ground assault, or they can also be used to capture ships. We can talk about that a little bit in combat, but essentially it's just another. It indicates that they have a contingent of Marines on board that they can use in some kind of ground assault, base assault, and various other things. So there we can see they've got Y-Tech. They've very clearly got, based on the distribution here, we can see 1, 2, 3. They've got 3 supply, Y-Tech, and one of the largest fleets in the game. At 27.5 EP, the Romulans are right up there, and between the Lyrans, the Romulans, the Remans, we're really pushing the average of everyone's economy into the upper 20s. The upper 20s seems to be the new sort of spot of coalescence for everybody. That's kind of like the new trend or new standard. That's the mean on where everybody sort of should, could, or would be. So very interesting to see that. Let's take a quick look to the chat. Now, I know the chat here is horrible, but let me take a quick look here. So I know I'm looking in the opposite direction of the chat. It's just where my screen is. Let's take a quick look at what the chat has to say. Ooh, going back to the top. Okay, Paul, Bill, Jim's here. Chuck's here. Woohoo! Okay, so let's talk about what they're saying here. So Chuck says, I'm converting to Y from W, so that he's the Lyran. So talking about the Lyran ships, he's converting Lyran ships to W ships. Sorry, Lyran ships to W ships. He's converting W ships to Y era ships. So that's really interesting to note. He can do that, upgrade those ships. Not everybody can do that. Interesting note for the Romulans, everything in their fleet is upgradable. They can go from S era all the way to GW era with some of their designs. They have a fully upgradable fleet. Very interesting. Hey, can we do off-map exploration? Short answer is no. Bill's asking that. Paul's talking about a monster. We're going to talk about the monster in a second when we go to the Fearsome Four. Chuck says his WSR1, so remember we saw that on the Lyrans, they had a WSR1 versus WSR2, and I theorized that maybe the WSR1 was destroyed. He's saying that it was scrapped for a Y, so the Y era SR. Jim saying greatest form of flattery. Everyone is changing to my 3-range base distribution. Very interesting to see. Well, we'll see how well that works, Jim. We'll see how that 3 base distribution works for everybody. We'll see. Chuck's saying, I think the reason the bases are not uniform like the other games is that the supply rules are a little different. Jim, Pelican, right? So the P in a lot of these Romulan ships refers to Pelican. That's the name of a bird, obviously. And that's what it's talking about. When we're talking about the S ships, they're making reference here to sublight, so basically warp tech versus below warp. So sublight engines, hence the S. Dell's joining. Yeah, Bill Monster dead, matey. Okay, so Dell is the Remans. He's chiming in here, and no one can see the Romulans. Dun dun dun. Well, let's take a moment and get into the Fearsome Four, shall we? So let's start. This is going to be interesting where I'm going to place my head. Let's start with this. Okay, so welcome to the map. Once again, this one is not displaced at all. And you'll see why, because of all the players involved. We're a little zoomed out here to be able to see. So as we scroll down, you'll see that there is the Remans in the top, followed by the ISC in yellow. We have the Hydrans in green and the Carnavan down below. Let's take a look. So before we dive into all those different factions, I want to point out why this map is so interesting. The Vol from the Hydrans. Now this is indicating that this is the out or the other side of Wormhole Kilo. Where is Wormhole Kilo? Let's take away the bases and ships for a second. We can see Wormhole Kilo is right here. So crossing the neutral zone, the Hydrans have sent a ship through this wormhole, and it popped out here. So bringing back bases and ships, we can see that there is a Hydran Vol here. And based on what we saw in the very beginning with the Lyrans, we know the Lyrans are here, and the Lyrans see them. They don't see the Lyrans. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. I know Jim is probably furiously scrubbing back on the live stream already, trying to get a sense of where everything is. But the Lyrans, basically the Hydrans have found the Lyrans are right there, and we're going to see how that all works out. The fact that that is a two-way wormhole will be very interesting, and it will create a lot of interesting dynamics between the Hydrans, the Carnavans, and the Lyrans, because if the Lyrans so chose, and if they had the ability to go through that wormhole, they could stir the pot on the other side. We'll see. Or from the Carnavans or the Hydrans' perspective, they could do the same thing to the Lyrans. That's the sort of interesting dynamic piece around wormholes. But let's take a look at the one in the bottom here. This is also the one that the Romulans saw, which is the Carnavans. And there was this fleet here, if you remember, it had an escort with a large exploration freighter. So that was from the Carnavans, and that was through their J or Juliet wormhole that popped out right here. So very interesting to see. And another note, I don't know that we saw this in the last map that we revealed, but we can see that there is a gravity well here, Mike, and there's no ship here, but there's a sensor reading. So first of all, let's find out where Mike is. Okay, so let's take away the bases. And let's take away the ships. So Mike is right here. So the ISC sent something through this, and it popped out here. And then when we bring the ships back and the bases, they obviously moved in this direction and came across something here. But there is no ship there now. So we're going to have to ask the ISC, what happened? What happened? Did you have an event? Did something go wrong? Was there a warp core breached? Were you attacked? I don't know. Did a monster come out of nowhere? Like, what happened that we have this sort of sensor echo that something's here, which is a 2-size class 4 vessels. One is slow moving. One is fast. So a slow and a fast, both size class 4. Yeah, let's see. Okay. Well, we'll let the chat catch up with us while we dive into some of this other stuff. Okay, let's dive into the Remans. Let's zoom in and take a look at the Remans. All right, Remans, what do you got? Let's take a quick look at EP. So going across the board here, we can see that the Hydrons will go from just top to bottom on the list. The Carnavans at the bottom of the map are at 26 EP. That, again, ties in really well with the Romulans and the Lyrans at 27.5 each. The Carnavans are at 26. We can see the Hydrons are at 28. Again, coalescing around that 27-ish number. The ISC are at 24.5. And the Remans are 26. So the Carnavans, the Remans, the Hydrons, the Lyrans, the Romulans, all coalescing around that 27.5 number. A little bit above, a little bit below, respectively. The ISC are not far behind with 24.5. And things are looking good. Let's take a quick look at fleet cap for all of these guys. So we can see that the Carnavan have reclaimed the title of largest fleet. I guess they never lost it, considering. The Carnavan, as of turn 38, are the largest fleet in the game. They have 28 ship equivalents with a total fleet cap of 127. We're seeing that there's a 50 attack, 125 defense. It would indicate they have some crippled ships that they are repairing, but 28 total ship equivalents. That's pretty good. As we go down, we can see that the Hydrons are beefing up their fleet. They are at 23 with a 38-89 split. So very interesting to see that sort of the difference between like 5 ships and how much that makes a difference for the Carnavan, the Hydrons in this split here. But essentially, you're looking at a 40 attack, 90 defense versus the 50, 125 for the Carnavan. So there's not exactly parity there, but it's pretty close. 23 ship equivalents, and I think that'll go to sort of what we'll get to with the Hydrons, which was a war that they waged against their Tholian minor faction. The ISC have 9 ship equivalents, and I mean, granted, the number of ships is low, but still, look at those attack and defense factors. I mean, they've got 30-63 with only 9 ships. They have less than 50% of the Hydron fleet, and they have almost, we'll call it 3/4 of the attack and defense factors of the Hydron Navy. So pretty interesting to see. We can see that the Remans have a total of 17 ship equivalents, and their split is very interesting. Again, higher attack than the Hydrons with, another quarter ships, 6 ships basically, more than they have, but they have better attack, a little lower in defense, but that really matches well with sort of the Klingon ships that their fleet is based off of. Again, the Remans being a Romulan flavor of Klingon, or a Klingon flavor of Romulans, however you want to look at that. Basically, Klingon-styled ships with plasma weapons and cloaks. So really interesting to see. And of course, as we saw before, we saw the Romulans were on that fleet cap. That's because the Romulans had gone through a wormhole, which let's just quickly go back to the Romulan. So they've gone through this gravity well and popped out in hydrant space. So yeah, very interesting to see that there. Okay, let's take a look at where the Remans are at. Let's take away the ships for a sec. We can see that their base distribution is looking essentially the same as it was before. Resources are as they were. As we bring back the ships, no new resources found, but we can see that the border continues to be explored. The YFEL is working its way across the neutral zone, exploring all those hexes. We can see that the fleet that was up in the top corner here, allegedly to deal with a monster, perfectly. I say allegedly, but I mean dealing with a monster, has now sort of dispersed and is going off to deal with other things. We've got a cruiser with a prime team, another cruiser with a prime team, cruiser with a prime team. So he's really taking advantage of that, as well as the KD-3E is the exploration survey ship. You can see again the white diamond on these counters. So exploration cruisers with prime teams, really taking advantage of that. I note that there's only 2 of them. Let's see what's in New Fleet. New Fleet still has a collection of 3 W-era cruisers and 2 W-era frigates down in the bottom corner here. And I only see one YFEL. YFES. So 1 YFES. So as far as the sort of exploration goes, we've got 2 exploration cruisers, 1 large exploration freighter, so that's the maximum for those kinds of ships he can have, and he's got 1 YFES. Obviously, the more of those you can build, the better, but we'll see how that goes. We got New Fleet. What is the name of that bottom fleet there? It is probably Prometheus Fleet. Yes. So we can see Prometheus Fleet right next to the Orions. It looks like the Orions might get a visit. So we got a couple of D4s or KD4s. So this is the Y-era cruiser, a Y-era destroyer, and a bunch of 4 of them Y-era frigates. So quite a collection, quite a fleet that he's looking to basically stomp potentially the Orions with here. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. All right, let's go to the ISC. ISC. Oh, okay. So they got a monster. We'll deal with that in a second. Let's go from the top to the bottom. So we can see that the YFEL continues to explore into the north, probably at the extent of its range, which is why this convoy is moving up. This convoy is probably going to build a base station, maybe Romeo 9 or wherever he wants to. And there's going to be probably some other ships that come up here and fill in the gap between these bases and the border here. We can also, I love the names of all these fleets. We've got Law Fleet, Truth Fleet. My goodness. Let's just go down. Where's the ISC at the top here? There we go. So they have such great names for these named echelons. Destiny Fleet, Enforcement Fleet, Integrity Fleet, Judgment Fleet, Justice Fleet, Law Fleet. Like, how righteous can you be? It's pretty awesome. So we've got a number of these fleets, and as we described or we looked at them before, and sorry, let me just revisit that. I was so fast with those fleets and didn't really show you the named echelons. So as we can see here, the fleet distribution is basically a YCL with a special unit. So we have an R&D team, which is in Destiny Fleet. So I'm assuming Destiny Fleet is somewhere. Where'd you go? Where is Destiny Fleet? It would make sense that Destiny Fleet would be perhaps on the gravity well to do research on it, or well, where did Destiny Fleet go? So it'll be interesting to see where Destiny Fleet is. I obviously can't see it right now because I am blind as a bat. There it is. It's on their homeworld. So it seems that maybe he just built it, hasn't moved it, but I would recommend that this, maybe it was supposed to go and the monster changed plans. But sending it to this gravity well and doing research there is probably the best way to go there. You can see the YCLs, a bunch of prime teams on board. We have a diplomat with Justice Fleet. Justice Fleet probably going to head there. And there's Judge Fleet. What do we got here? We got Truth Fleet. That's probably Judge Fleet. Judgment fleet. Okay, so interesting. Yeah, the fleets I find a little obviously confusing here for some reason, but I would expect that the diplomat's probably going to head to either one of his planets to be able to improve. Come on, stop that. There we are. To improve the planetary attitude of some of these planets, or maybe you can send a diplomat to another player's capital, and they can do what's called an economic mission. It adds 1 EP to your economy when you do that for both players. So that could be the way that goes. Very interesting. So again, the fleets are all basically a light cruiser, which is a really good ship for the ISC, and a special unit, whether it's a research and development team, a prime team, or a diplomat team. Other than that, we can see that the YFELs are continuing their march to the center, working on this, what do we want to call it, a corridor. We have, there's Justice Fleet underneath that convoy at this colony that they've obviously just recently taken. So this colony here in November 18 is what they've taken. Justice Fleet's there with the diplomat, probably making that better. Good to see. And good because the colony now provides them supplies so they can continue to explore in this general direction. We can see this is the big thing, the monster. Now, the monster counter, or any monster counter in itself, doesn't really mean much, although it depends on the GM's sort of flavor. In previous games, the counter didn't mean much. It was just a counter. And then when you went to encounter the monster, you would then discover what it was, and then you'd find out how it was going to kill you or try to. In this case, the icon, the graphic that you can see there is very much the planet killer from the original series, the Doomsday device, but it is not necessarily that kind of monster. So we'll have to wait and see when the player, the ISC, goes and investigates what that monster is, and he'll find out, and maybe he can share with us what that monster is, what it does to him, and so on. One of the things about monsters that can happen is that some monsters, some creatures, have an ability to be able to attack you and affect all units at the same time. So for example, if you were to attack a monster with a fleet of 10 ships, because 10 ships is better than 1 ship, and you figure that you're going to have a better ability to stomp it or destroy it or kill it with 10 ships, theoretically you're right, except that if in one battle round it has a weapon or an offensive capability that affects all of your units concurrently, and you have one cruiser and a whole bunch of little light flimsy frigates, then potentially it can cripple and then destroy all your frigates in that maybe 1 or 2 turn go, while you're still trying to do damage to it and yet to cripple it. So that's something to think about. When you encounter a monster, the mechanics in the game are such that you initially sort of discover what it is, like scientific discovery, sensor readings, things like that. You discover what it is, and then you can figure out, how you can kill it. Or you can go straight in. If you go straight in, you're probably going to have a surprise. Sometimes that surprise is good. Sometimes that surprise is bad. We'll see how that goes. But it'll be interesting to hear from the ISC what this monster is and how he deals with it. Because based on the distribution of ISC fleets, and we saw he's only got 9 ship equivalents, how is he going to be able to deal with a monster? Because he's going to have to pool his ships together to be able to attack it, potentially. And how strong is that monster? Is it like a Doomsday device or like the Planet Killer, or is it something much more minor? We'll see. We'll have to see. We'll have to get an update from the ISC player as we go forward. Before I go down to the hydrants, let's just quickly head over to the chat. I will bring back this screen if that helps. I know the chat is way too small. I will fix that in the next live stream. Okay, Remans, fake Klingons. That's hilarious. Okay, let's scroll up here. So much chat here today. Wonderful, guys. Okay, so let's go. We got Del's laughing. We've got Mejiman. Dad, I got to get off the phone. I'm missing New Worlds. Love it. Love it. Jim, you know me so well. Chuck, not good for the hydrants. Well, we'll see. Del, hail to the fish boys and girls, and the other one. Nice Orion Pirates wanted to help. I don't think so. Paul. Oh, Paul's saying so he had a fight with sounds like Orion pirates. So the pirates wanted to help. I don't think so. So I'm assuming, Paul, you had a fight with Orions, maybe. I'd be interested to hear what that's all about. So anyways, it sounds like you encountered Orions. Maybe those ships were Orions, and you attacked them. Did you attack them or did they attack you? So you're saying that they wanted to help. I don't know. We'll see. Dell, diplomats are doing their jobs. Finally. Chuck, Remans are fake Klingons. Klingon Treaty of Sambra ships. This is making reference to FASA. FASA being sort of another IP when it comes to Star Trek, but basically talks about that and the Starfleet universe. He has 2 YFESs, Paul says. We'll have to find that other one. I see a planet crusher. Diplomats on November 18. Crush dem planets, Daniel says. Daniel being our GM. Bill, Jim, how much you paying for Orion faction, dude? Interesting. Oh, bunches. Paul, not ID'd yet. Fleet building now to add a few ships. Paul, yes, my crippled ship. So building a fleet now to ID the monster, I'm assuming. And yes, my crippled ship. Crippled ship being the one that went through the wormhole. We'll see. Romulans, future Reman subjects. Oh, very interesting. Okay, we'll see how that goes. Okay. All right, well, let's head back to the map, and we're going to explore the Hydrons, or our tentacular friends. Okay. So very interesting. Well, just to play off the Orion thing for a second, very interesting to note this. Look at this little concentration of blue in the map, or on the map, I should say. Let's take away the ships for a sec. We have 2 Orion bases close together, and they have a resource. Now, normally that color is to indicate that the resource is neutral, but maybe the Orions are mining it? Interesting to think about. Let's take a quick look. We can see that if we take away the ships for a second, this little planet over here, the Iron Web, used to be a Tholian faction, now not. The Hydrons went and stomped the Tholian faction, and there's a little bit of a story there. We can see that we've got 1st and 2nd Fleet. So let's look at Hydron 1st and 2nd Fleet, assuming that those are the 2 fleets that were used to attack it. We can see that we have a collection of 2 vols each in those fleets, both crippled. We've got a base there and a base there, so he's going to repair those ships at that base, or at those bases. The Old Colony Squadron, and what's the other one there? Home Fleet. So Hydron, Old Colony, and Hydron Home Fleet. So we can see that the Hydron Home Fleet has a vol in it, and then we've got the 3 Musketeers, which, too funny. So the 3 Musketeers and the vol are heading back to the homeworld, it would seem, and recovering from their recent encounter with the Iron Web. We also have 3rd Fleet here. What do we got in 3rd Fleet? Just trying to find this. Oh, another crippled ship that looks like there's probably a base there. Yep, to repair it. So it looks like after the attack, he's dispersed his fleet to repair in all these different bases, which is exactly what you should do, taking advantage of the repair capacity, distributed as it is, across that sort of area of space for him. Neon Fleet, I imagine, is the same, except there's no base there. And then Argon Fleet, one of the noble gases. Again, these noble gas fleets are the exploration fleets. So Neon, Argon, Xenon, there we are. Those are the exploration fleets. We can see there's a big push or concentration of ships. 2 of his SRs, or survey vessels, with prime teams embarked, are exploring down, we'll call it the Hydron corridor, towards the center of the map. We've also got 2 supporting tugs in that vein. And they're cruisers, so they have a better chance than not in exploring, but not very good. And they are moving, I guess, with the WSRs to be able to build more bases and support that as they go. We can also see here a YCC. So interesting to note, a YCC. His YCC, like the Romulan CC. So the King Bird for the Romulans is the equivalent of their command cruiser. So the YCC here, again, a 4.6. So the command cruiser for the Romulans and the Hydrons, for example, a 4.6, which is equivalent to a cruiser for some other factions. The Klingons, by example, the Remans, and I believe the Federation. So, yeah, really, really interesting here. Let me take a quick sip of water. As we roll down to the Carnavan. All right, Carnavan, how are my my pups doing? He says with no sense of sarcasm. Okay, Carnavan home fleet. So previously, when we looked at the Carnavan home fleet, there was this massive fleet still there. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay, so the Carnavans have the biggest fleet in the game. They are what I would say big and scary. And we have a WCC, three YCAs, 2 WCAs. So that's like, man, that is 6 cruisers, followed by how many? Hold on. 8 W-era destroyers. Now, granted, they're weak, but still 8 ships. 3 W-era frigates, a commando cruiser. I'm going to say it's a cruiser, maybe a destroyer, a WCG, and then 2 prime teams. Yeah, 2 prime teams. All that is homeworld. So this massive fleet at the homeworld, it's impressive. It's not small. Not small is the way I would describe it. So yeah, that's pretty significant. So he's got this massive home fleet, and the fleet is not distributed. So, for example, when we look around the map, it's not like they're everywhere here. But we can see that they got a YCA up here at New Wilder. Obviously, Van Wilder had a planet, and that's what it's called. We have Exploration Freighter doing a little work here along the border, as well as a YFES and a YFEL pushing to the west. YCA with prime team with looks like some supporting DDs nearby, and a YCL with a prime team. So doing again this exploration to the east, to the edge of the map. Always good to get that backyard sorted out. We can see 2 convoys working on, if we move this out of the way, probably working on building bases to the south, as we can see here. And then, of course, a YCA with a prime team. Interesting to note, so up until now, we haven't seen any tugs from the Carnavan, but I can see one right here. And it would seem that, obviously, he can build tugs. They're a 2.5 ship, which is pretty good. And those Y tugs are going to be, there's 2 of them. What am I saying? There's 2 tugs and 3 convoys. So the tugs are going to be instrumental in being able to really build out that base network and allow the Carnavans to really expand, because that's really the biggest thing at this point, I would say, is restricting their growth, is just their logistics, their base building infrastructure to be able to get out there. So like if I take away the ships right now, we've got what, 3 YBSs, 1 about to be finished, and then the only other points of supply they have are planets or colonies. So yeah, that's the biggest sort of Achilles heel right now for the Carnavans, is they have a massive fleet, but they just don't have the infrastructure to be able to sort of support it going anywhere. So the more they build that out, the better that'll be, and it'll be great. Ooh, interesting. So first Hydran War of Revenge, Jim says. Here, I should probably go back to the chat real quick. So the first Hydran War of Revenge, that was the war against the Tholians, because in the storyline, the Tholians had a ship that crashed on the Hydran homeworld, caused a natural disaster or environmental disaster, and caused all sorts of issues. Chuck says, game tip, auxiliary troop ships are your friends. We proved, the Klingons that is, proved that early in the game in assaulting, doing ground assaults on colonies with YPGs, Y-era planetary ground bases, PGBs. Jim's noted, building 1 this turn. Chuck, moves slow, but if attacking a base or planet, well worth the investment. What happened? Chuck says, I took a planet with 1 crippled. that was it. 4G, 4G being 4G factors equals 2 supported attacks. Interesting. Okay. All right. So interesting chat. So we can talk about that. Let me just quickly address the combat. So in last week, we talked about making sure that you are subscribed to be able to catch our episode, our video on combat. That was supposed to come out this last week. I apologize. Just a little more work going into that than I anticipated, and time. And so hoping to get that video out for you next week, this coming week. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed and hit that little bell notification so you know that it's coming and that you're notified when it hits, when it goes live. So there's that piece. That video is coming. In that video, because there's so much in combat, we're going to keep it pretty vanilla. We're going to talk about at least 3 different aspects of combat, basically the overall combat, small scale combat, and then there's some other sort of niche things that we can talk about in combat as well. But there's so much. The rule set for Federation and Empire is so big. It's there's a lot of nuance to the rules. So while those tutorials will come out and they will give you a great explanation and foundation for how to conduct combat and how combat works in this game, one of the biggest things I recommend to all players and anyone who wants to be a player in this game is get into the book and read it, because there are sort of niche circumstances, nuances to the rules, little things, little details that you need to be able to understand that you can use in a certain situation that can have a huge effect on the outcome of any one particular battle or situation. One, for example, is talking about retreats and how retreats can be used and the priority system that's used around retreating. We had a debate about that in the Discord channel earlier this week, and it was really interesting to talk about that, because you really need to understand the nuance of it to be able to leverage it and use it to your best effect. In the very first game that I played, I got screwed when another player attacked me and then used the retreating rules in a particular way to be able to retreat further into my territory effectively. It was incredibly annoying, very frustrating, because I didn't kind of understand what was going on, and it forced me to really dig into the rules to figure out what was going on and to really get to the interpretation of the rules as it was discussed by the GM. So having those roundtable discussions, would you like to see those discussions? Fireside chats with the GM talking about rules and how we sort of interact with the rules and how we apply those rules in this game. Would that be of any interest to you? If it is, put it in the chat, leave it in the comments, let me know that that's something you'd like to see in the future, and we can make a video about that. That'd be great. All right, let's head back quickly to the map. I will bring up, just make sure, I will bring up our good friends, La Fédération. So one of the things here that we talked about in last week's stream was we were really excited about getting to see the Tholians. Well, we're not going to get to see the Tholians. So as we can see here, there are some Tholian ships, but redacted. So what's going on here? The Federation player, and I'll show you this real quick. The Federation player, based on these 2 bases and the space in between them being open, they can see each other. The Federation player can see the Tholian map. However, based on the current state of the game and the fact that there is this desire for certain players to sort of keep their maps hidden, where they are on the map, how well they're doing, all this kind of stuff, the Tholian player does not want to share their information yet. Now, there will be a point in the game when, too bad so sad, it'll open up, because you'll have multiple players that will have encountered the Tholian player, and the maps will open up. But at this point, for the purposes of the live stream and letting other players see where you're at, how you're doing, the Tholian player isn't ready to share their map just yet. So in respect of that desire and that wish, the GM has redacted the Tholian map. So all we're going to get to see really is the Federation. However, once the second player, and we can theorize about who where everybody might be and who might be below, above, next to the Tholians, when that next person bumps into the Tholians, it's probably going to be open map at that point. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Let's bring back the ships. Okay, so first of all, let's take a quick look at EP. So we're not seeing the Tholian economy or anything like that in this. We're just looking at the Federation. So the Federation currently has 24 EP. So if we look at the spectrum of what we've seen essentially a changing of the center of gravity, or the changing of the average of where everybody's economy is at. The new average economy is floating towards 26, 27, 28. So we can see that the Federation in that example is just a little bit below the average. They're at 24. That said, they are not below the average when it comes to their fleet. Or at least I say that, but now I'm looking at it. They have 11 ship equivalents, and then we just finished looking at the Fearsome Four and the Lyrans and the Romulans, and we've seen fleet caps or ship equivalent numbers of in the 20s for many factions, and now we see the Federation at 11. So whereas the other factions, or where the Federation started off strong with a large fleet, now we see that they are not. They at 11 ship equivalents, they are small, relatively speaking, to what we've seen with other players. Now that being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because they're applying the resources in other ways to other things, but they've got the sweet spot of ships that they need to be able to conduct the exploration that they want to do. Cruisers with prime teams to be able to do that exploration. And that's working for them. It's just that when they do bump into somebody else, and we can theorize as to who that might be, it's going to be important that they have something to say hello with, shall we say. So we'll see how this evolves over the coming turns and years in the game. But let's do around the clock. So we can see that they've got 11 ship equivalents, 35 attacks, 65 defense. Interesting to note that that attack and defense is still on par with the Hydrans. Hydrans had 38 attack, and they've got 35, and they've only got 11 ships. So half the number of ships, equivalent attack, not the same defense, but not too far off. So I don't expect that based on the Fearsome Four, I don't expect that the Federation is going to bump into the Hydrans anytime soon. But all that to show you that the ship equivalent number isn't the be-all and end-all of everything. So we've done EP, we've done fleet cap. Let's take a look at, we'll take away the ships real quick, and we'll look at their base distribution. So we know that their base distribution was tight, shall we say. So we can see it's still tight now, and they've built out this base towards the border. So we've got bases building towards the Tholian border. This base specifically built to be able to facilitate communication with this particular Tholian base and open up those maps. So they can see each other. Great to see. It'll be interesting to see how that sort of expands going forward. Not a lot of exploration or sort of base building in the north, which is interesting to note. And based on what we can see here, not a lot of tugs or convoys moving in that direction either. Of course, you can only build so many bases at a time, especially if you're doing them with convoys, and the focus has very obviously been to build them along where he's encountered his first neighbor, the Tholians. So we can see here, along the border with the Tholians, we've got a YFEL, a YCA with a prime team, and a WCA with a prime team. So cruisers and exploration ships looking to probably explore this area along the border, so sort of open that up as much and quickly as possible. The ships continue to explore. Unfortunately, they're kind of at the edge of their supply range. You can see that this WCA hasn't moved into another hex because it's already at 3 hexes away from its base, and I suspect, barring something very strange, that the Federation has only 3 supply. So maybe this convoy is going to be moving up here to extend supply. That is a mission that they can do. They can offer an extension of up to 3 hexes beyond with their location of supply. So maybe they're going to move north and provide supply to these ships. If so, great. Or maybe just build another base, maybe in Echo 32 here, and continue that exploration to the northeast. We can see We've got an interesting collection of cruisers here, 3W, 1Y, all with prime teams in one location. I don't know if they're being redirected towards the Tholian border, maybe. We can see here we've got an R&D team with a YPC. So what's going on here is that this R&D team is moving to the capital of the Federation, and they're going to conduct joint research. It's a feature of R&D teams in this game. You can send them to another faction's homeworld, and you collaborate on doing research and development on a specific theme of tech. So we have a tech tree, and they're broken into sort of subject matter themes, logistics, weapons, miscellaneous and macro systems, things like that. And so as you can focus your research on any one of those themes, and then there's a random roll to indicate what you discover or which one of those texts you make a discovery on, and it adds research points and progresses your research on those particular texts. So really interesting and good to see that the Feds have built theirs, the Tholians are sending theirs over, and there's going to be obviously some good cooperation between these two. So that's good to see, at least from the Federation side. Interesting that we can see a cruiser over top this Kzinti planet with a diplomat. So he's going to try and convert that planet in a nice way. Interesting that he chooses to do that, because I would argue, why not just stomp them? Because you have the ships to do it. You could take all your cruisers, or however many you want, attack that planet, take it out, and it will not change the economic output of the planet because it's only a colony. Colony only has 1 EP output, whether you destroy it, dominate it, or otherwise. It's not going to change the economic output for you. The only thing is it might impact its ability to grow. If there's a growth turn coming up and you devastate it, it won't grow. But the turns that you're at war are really a boom to your economy, and you can use that money to be able to build bases and other assets that you might need. So interesting to think about. It could be a role-playing reason why he's choosing to do, I mean, after all, he is the Federation, trying to play nice with his neighbors and sort of integrate them into his civilization. Again, interesting to note, count them, 2 wormholes real close to his homeworld, and hasn't sent anything through. It would seem as though this convoy is probably going to build a base on this wormhole, which it would be a sound thing to do. And then he can do research and development on the wormhole tech. And if he can get that early and fast, it'll allow him to be able to go through and project force through those wormholes. So really interesting to see. Not much to see, obviously, from the Tholian side. I mean, what can we see here? He's got 2 convoys, a bunch of these patrol craft, Y-era patrol craft, so he's in Y-era. Really not much to talk about other than he's just got exploration ships and a couple of these patrol craft YPCs in the area. YPCs, not great ships, but when you get them together, they can be a little tougher to defeat. So interesting to see that. All right, let's quickly go through. We've got 2 more factions to look at. We've got the Gorn, and then we're going to take one last look at the Klingons before we wrap things up. Okay, so here we have the Gorn. We'll zoom in one more so you can take a better look at them. Let's take a quick look at their EP. So you can see here, again, we were talking about the average. So the Gorn are at 23.5. This is good because they are continuing to grow. The 23.5, though, is at the lower end of the average. As we've seen, the average has now moved up to 26, 27, 28. And the Gorn are at 23.5. But they continue to grow as far as space, and it's just a matter of luck of the die to be able to find resources. You see that they have found resources at the edge of their exploration, and they're continuing to explore in a very relatively uniform fashion. They're continuing to build their base network, in this case to the south. Bringing back the ships, we can see that they've got no tugs, but are using convoys to build things, which slows things down. You can only do 1 base build at a time with convoys, so it makes things slow. So we've got convoy. It looks like it's going to build a base here and continue that exploration to the south. This convoy, not sure where it's going, but probably going to continue base building sort of in this general direction. A little bit of exploration to the south, so continue this battleship. which has essentially equivalent to a survey cruiser with it when it's got the prime team embarked. It has equivalent to that for its exploration fleet or expeditionary fleet. Gorn expeditionary fleet. So it has the YFEL with an escort. So we can see that continuing to explore, and it's just really, the Gorn's doing the right things. The only problem is just the lack of luck. We can see that he's got 13 ship equivalents, which again is the lower end of the average here, with a 2150 split, low on the attack and defense factors, but he doesn't have any neighbors to really worry about, although those neighbors are certainly coming. It's just a matter of time. So we got the Gorns, 13 ship equivalents, 2150 split. And I would recommend, I mean, granted, with the economy that he has, the priority right now is certainly exploration. Really push that exploration and facilitate anything and everything you can do to build out the base network and the ability to explore more hexes. The more you explore, the more your economy can grow. So that's pretty quick there. Is this map offset? Chuck is asking. Yes. This is an alternative location for the Gorn. So the Gorn are not in between you and the Remans. This is an offset map. So to recap the maps that were offset, or rather the maps that are not offset, are the Fearsome Four and the Lyrans. Everybody else is offset. That's the Romulan, the Feds, the Tholians, the Klingons, the Gorn. All those other factions are offset or not in their true location. So let's take a quick look at the Klingons. Oh, I'm in the wrong. My head is in the way. Let me move my head out of the way. Boom. Okay, again, this map is offset. Let's zoom in a little bit and let's see what's going on. So first things first, we had a couple of bad news bears moments here. Unfortunately, the Klingon people are mourned to hear that there was a catastrophic warp core failure in one of our exploration ships in the northern part of the kingdom, or the Empire, and unfortunately we lost that ship. So there was an exploration ship that was up in this top area here that was lost due to a random event, and that's very unfortunate. However, and more importantly, somebody decided to blow up one of our ships, and that really went over well. This is the Borat. The Borat are a in this case, non-player faction, who encountered one of our unescorted exploration freighters that entered into their space. And what was their response? They blew it up. As you can imagine, that went over really well at Klingon High Command, and we are currently evaluating how best to respond. I think you can imagine what the response may be. Shall we be diplomatic with our Omicron response and strategy, or shall we be more dominant with our alpha strategy? Time will tell as things are going forward, and I will share with you in the next live stream how this is going to be resolved. But in the meantime, let's take a look at what's going on here. So we can see that, let's take a quick look at EP. So put this over my head here. So we can see that the Klingon economy is at 31.5. That's not much of a change from before. 31.5 is pretty much standard. But the Klingons as overall are just a little bit above the average in the game. So the 31.5 EP, let's look at fleet cap. This is an interesting number that quite honestly the Klingons need to be concerned about. Klingon ship equivalent 16, nothing's changed. So the 34-64 split of attack to defense factors means that the Klingon fleet has not substantially changed since very early in the game. And there's only 16 ship equivalents. That's not the lowest, but it's certainly not the highest when we're talking about some factions with as many as 27, 28 ships. So there needs to be a concerted effort to build more ships. Well, if that just happens to be the situation, there just may be a reason why we need to build some more ships with a hostile, aggressive military faction that has presented itself in a tender part of our territory. So very interesting to note that this faction, well within our supply range, right next to one of our bases, is choosing to sort of pick a fight. How is that going to be resolved? We shall see. I will share with you in the next episode how that's going to change things. But lo and behold, that's 2 exploration vessels that were lost this turn. One was the exploration cruiser, which is real pain in the butt. But the YFES was a hostile act by this faction, and they blew it out of the water. So we'll see how that goes. Other than that, we've got our various task groups, which are exploring, which are just cruisers with prime teams that are exploring these various areas. So Joint Task Force Alpha and Bravo are exploring their different sides of the map. Home Fleet, same thing. And then we have an exploration cruiser right here. We have a D4N, which is a diplomatic ship, which is currently continuing to work on trying to improve the attitude of this particular colony, as you can see, to great effect. And this past turn, the tugs have, we've got tugs, T4s, you can see here are Klingon tugs. And there's a tug here on this particular planet to be able to build a base for security. And then, of course, this particular tug here are going to build a base and build out that ability to round out the circle when it comes to the exploration. So, yeah, we're trying to round the edges here. As you can see, there's this sort of natural evolution of how the exploration has gone. So the general strategy here is round this off with exploration in this space, sort of complete the curve with the Borat here, rounding this out. And then it's relatively round here, but we're going to have to build some more bases and kind of scoot that over. And then, of course, build the bases up this way and make this more of a circle. The intention is to be more Romulan. I can't believe I'm saying that, in our exploration design. It just hasn't worked out that way. So we're going to try and have a little bit more of a concerted effort to make it more uniform in its sort of shape, because that'll just be, it'll be easier to support from a logistics standpoint. And if and when, because it's just a matter of when we bump into a neighbor, because we haven't yet, then when we bump into that neighbor, we'll see what happens. On that note, and we should take a second here, so I'll go back to the chat while we talk about it. The bumping into neighbors, it's just part of the game, but we really need to talk about or explore, where everybody is on the map. So we saw the Fearsome Four, and if you want to go back and scrub back to that part in the stream, please do so. The Fearsome Four map is not displaced. So we know that the Remans are essentially center right at the top of the map, and they come around the side with the Carnavan. We know the Lyrans are to the top and to the left. So based on where those guys are, there's only sort of like this bottom crescent where everybody else can be. Who do we have in that space? We have the Romulans, the Gorn, the Klingons, the Tholians, and the Federation. We know the Federation and the Tholians are neighbors. We know they're right next to each other, but the Gorn, the Roms, and the Klingons still haven't bumped into anybody. And that's pretty interesting, considering that the Fearsome Four have all bumped into each other. We know the Lyrans are they've encountered somebody. They've encountered the Hydrants. The Romulans are about to encounter the Carnavans. But those are all due to wormholes. Those last two are due to wormholes. So that's not really something that's going to change the geopolitical, not too much. I mean, like they're just not neighbors, right? So there's no real quick avenue for conflict if that was going to be the case. So what's the at this point in the game, what happens next? Well, the big thing is, first of all, this is a war game. So we are playing a game that's designed to fight. We're the game is all about fighting your enemies or fighting your opponents, and winning, trying to win the game. How you go about that, so many different ways to do that. And one of the sort of the challenges in this game in the past has been this this real preference for peace. And don't get me wrong, peace is good, but it's a war game, so why don't we war with each other? This crop of players is much more in that vein, generally speaking. But as we've already seen, the Fearsome Four seem to be getting along just fine. The Tholians and the Federation seem to be getting along just fine. So there's already some jockeying of position there to sort of make things right. So for the players that haven't bumped into neighbors yet, which is effectively, I mean, I'm not going to include the wormhole encounters too much, but the Lyrans, the Romulans, the Gorn, and the Klingons, those four factions, so I'll say we, really need to sort of pick and choose who we're going to be friends with and who we're going to fight with. Because if everybody else is friends and you're picking a fight with everybody else, that puts you in a really bad spot. Why? In this game, one key mechanic that's going to drive a lot of the role play is what we call war turns. For every turn that you're at a war economic status, and to recap, there are 3 different statuses when it comes to your economy: peace, limited war, and war. In peacetime, you get 50% of the economy that you generate. So for example, we talked about the Klingons being 31.5 EP. That's the total gross that we make in a turn. So the take-home pay, if you want to call it that, during peacetime is 15.75, and that's how much money we have to play with. That's half of the 31.5. So in limited war, that goes up to 75%, and in war, you get the full bang. You get the full 31.5 in this context. Limited war. So, for example, with the Borat, if we choose to go to war with them, we have to start with a limited war, and limited war lasts for 4 turns. Limited war is a escalation of your military-industrial complex. Think of it like a police action. You are ramping up production of military assets, and in that 4-turn period, you have to attack the minor faction in this case. So when dealing with minor factions, a limitation in this game is that you have to assume limited war status first. Then at the end of limited war, if you're still in conflict, you go to war status. Limited war status gives you 75% of your income and does not incur a war turn, but can last for up to 4 turns. In that 4 turns, you have to attack your target. At the end of those 4 turns, if you're still in conflict, you go to war status. And for every turn that you're at war status, again, the perks being you get 100% of your economy, and there is no fleet cap limitation on your navy, you incur a turn of war fatigue or war turn. There are 20 of those that you can accumulate before you start incurring an economic disadvantage. From 0 to 20, no problem. Turn 21, or a 21st war turn, incurs or applies a 75% income versus 100%. So basically, it's like you're at limited war. And you're at that for another 10 turns. From turn 21 to turn 30, you're at 75%, and then it kicks to 50%. And then we'll go down after that. We have never, in the history of this game, had anybody get into war fatigue, but I have a feeling in this game, we will. So how do you manage that? Because how do you recover from war turns? You incur these war turns, but then you work them, you work them off. You work them off for every turn that you're at peace. And it's a 1-to-2 ratio. 2-to-1 ratio. For every 2 turns that you're at peace, you recover 1 war turn from your bank, shall we say. So if you're at war for 20 turns, you have to be at peace for 40 turns before it goes back down to 0. So it's a really interesting thing. You could have a series of wars: war number 1, war number 2, war number 3, and let's say in war number 1 you were at war for 10 turns, and then you were at peace for 10 turns, which means you recovered 5 of those war turns. So you're still got 5 war turns in the bank. You go back to war for another 10 turns, and you're at 15 war turns. Then you go to peace again, but you're only at peace this time for 5 turns. Well, we'll call it 6. It'll make it easier for math. So you're at peace for 6 turns, which means you only recovered 3, which means you're down to, or you still have 12 war turns in the bank. And then you go to war again for another 10 turns. Well, in that third war, in the very end of that third war, you will start incurring significant penalties on your economy. You'll go to 75%. Then, when you go to peace, your peace isn't just peace. You're at 50% at peacetime, and then 75% of your peace economy. Does that make sense? So, if you want to think of it as peace, limited war, and war is your baseline gross, the war fatigue factor is something that's applied after you assess the gross. 50, 75, or 100% of your economy is what you get in peace, limited war, or war. Then when you recover from those war turns at peace, you're still paying the penalty of the 75% or more income penalty on your war fatigue. So if you've burnt out your economy spending 25 turns at war, and then you go to peace, in this case, let's use 20 just as a quick and easy number. If your gross economy is 20, when you're at war, you'll make 20 EP. When you go into the first stage of war fatigue, you'll only be making 15 during war. Then you go to peace, and instead of going to 10 EP, you'll go to 7.5 EP. Now that penalty isn't as significant as you go to peace. However, it's something to think about. You still incur that penalty. And that is going to be the thing that's going to make this all very dicey. Because as we evolve the game, and as we move through the different eras, and as people fight each other and get these war turns, that's what's going to make things interesting. One last shout to the chat. Dell's already getting excited about war. Let's talk about... Okay, Jim. So the Hydran home system problems? ? Yes. So we didn't talk about the Hydran home system in the during the turn. So basically, the Hydrans had an event where one of their planets in their home system revolted, and it was because it was unhappy. So it was I think it was hostile. And then a random event occurred where a hostile planet will be flipped and become independent. And so because there were effectively no security measures in place to be able to correct that, and the planet was unhappy, it revolted and he lost 3 EP of his income. Otherwise, he would be at 31 EP, very close to the Klingon economy. Instead, he's at 28. So when he reclaims that planet, he'll get another EP, he'll be up to 29, but he'll have to most likely devastate it if he wants to take it by force, or he can do a long, drawn-out diplomatic method that will just, make the pain last. So we'll see how that goes, but we'll talk about that as we go forward in the game. Bill's saying, I was looking at my compat, and I'm at 101 defense. 101 defense. Let's take a quick look at the Gorn. Where are you, Gorn? Okay, let's take a quick look at the Gorn map real quick and look at his compot. So there's all sorts of these different features in Vassal that allow you to open up different things you can look at. So when he's talking about compot, he's looking at his potential combat potential. Not his potential combat potential, but his combat potential. So what we're saying here is that with 7 ship equivalents, he's got 101 defense potential and 46 offense potential. How does that compare to his fleet cap? The total attack and defense is taking into account your bases. And so that's the difference. You've got the fleet cap number is a better assessment of the ships that you have. Compot also takes into account total compot, takes into account bases and the infrastructure that you've built. So that's the difference that you'll see there. Okay, yep, that's 4 turns of war is a nice shot in the arm. That 4 turns of war is a nice shot in the arm. Yes, yes, yes. Pinwheels are very nasty. So Jim's talking about the Tholians. Tholians have a unique tech or a unique ability, we'll call it, called the pinwheel. Basically, those patrol craft you keep seeing on the map, those patrol craft are wimpy. But what you can do with a Tholian is that you take 3 of them and they turn into this sort of like triangle. They call it a pinwheel. And it combines their attack and defense factors and then increases the defense factors. It's something we can talk about in combat. It's a specialty thing, but suffice it to say that pinwheels are a way to make Tholians harder to get rid of. Their attack factors don't increase, but their defense factors do. It just makes them a harder target to eliminate and makes battle last longer. So they are fighting or a Cold War, Bill asks. Talk about Tokyo, resource to colony. I'm not sure what you're talking about there, Bill. Chuck was talking about, is the map offset? So as I mentioned, the only maps that were not offset were the Lyrans and the Fearsome Four. Everyone else was offset. Jim, I'd be on a similar amount if my diplomats had any kind of professionalism amongst the old department heads. Hence, they have had their tentacles clipped. So he's talking about why the planet revolted, and then of course now he's going to try and diplomatically resolve it. Chuck says, I just did some calculations on the 3 stats, EP, fleet cap, and ship equivalents. Only 3 empires have all 3 above average. Bill says, Klingons to my east. Really? Interesting. So somehow Bill thinks that I'm to the east of him, which would be interesting. Like I said, we don't know where everybody is because we're not bumped into each other. But I think if you look at the map, you can figure out where the Romulans are based on the encounter of that Carnavan ship. We know where the Lyrans are. So based on where the Romulans are, we can start to figure out where everyone may be. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of looking at the map. So Jim is unfriendly. So they were unfriendly, not hostile. Jim, as I have been saying, the diplomat team's department heads were executed for their gross incompetence. Jim says my compot is 217 total compot to 508 defense. Take note, Federation. Note. Take note, Federation. I had a resource become a colony, Bill said. Good. That's awesome. Terry Mullins, speak for yourself. All right. So, yeah, that's where we're at. Like I said, what do you think of this this sort of graphic, this layout here? On the bottom banner that you can see below, we've got the latest subscriber, which is Sebastian, and then we can put other sort of notifications in there. If, for whatever reason, we did have a new subscriber, that new subscriber would, give me a second, that new subscriber would look like this. And that's what that would look like if there was a new subscriber that happened. So that was just an automated thing. I got to figure out how to do that with the chat, and obviously make that chat bigger so you can read it, and yeah, make it a little bit easier to look at. And then of course you got the sort of starry background going through warp space. Tell me what you think. If you like this layout, then I can play with it some more and do more with it. If you don't like it and you prefer the old school look, which for reference is this, then I can just go back to this. Whatever you like, whatever works best for you, you tell me. You're the audience. You're the reason why I'm doing this, and you tell me what you want to see. With that said, I really appreciate you joining us here for today's episode. Looking forward to the videos that'll be coming out this week and, of course, next week, and seeing who bumps into who's fighting who, and what's going on in Star Trek New Worlds. After all, space is getting crowded, borders are getting bumpy, and people are starting to encounter each other. So what's going to happen next? Don't know. You're going to have to subscribe to find out. So subscribe, hit that notification bell. Join us next week on the live stream, same bat time, same bat channel, Saturdays at 11 o'clock Pacific time, and you'll be able to see us here live and join us with the evolving story of Star Trek New Worlds. I will see you next week. Bye for now.